How's everybody doing? It's Jay Cuttz with another solo meaning of life segment. Shouts to Terry, shouts to Preem, to the people that have made this show possible. And as you can see, I'm right here in the studio on my own, and for this specific show, I want to bring forth the revelation that throughout the years, it's been a journey to figure out who I am and who I'm becoming and my purpose and what's behind the meaning of life and the meaning of the future that I want to build, And of course that can be subjective because not everybody has the same path in life, right? And that's the logic behind that. But it's come to my attention within the last few years that if I could go back in time, I would have probably studied psychology. Something that throughout my youthful years I just didn't really think about. I just thought that I wanted to make music and I wanted to be involved in arts and media. But the interest that I have in life and in the human mind, and when it comes to being able to comprehend people and social interactions, became so deep, especially due to the fact that I grew up with a speech impediment. I wasn't lacking in brain power or capacity. I was lacking in the area of being able to communicate effectively throughout my youth. And this situation has made me mature and has made me become who I am today in life. And it's like a blessing in disguise. Somebody else would think that maybe God might have made them, with less defects and that would have been better for them. But the way I see it, it specifically led me down the path of finding myself. And the good thing about speech impedimency as opposed to somebody that doesn't or has never had one is the fact that they really think about what they're going to say before they say it. They can reevaluate their responses, their words. People that weren't in a position to struggle with speech problems may express themselves without a filter, perhaps without even analyzing how these words might affect somebody. Because there's a saying that I heard when I was a kid in school a lot. I had to be like in pre-K or something, probably 5 years old actually, and it was like stick and stones might hurt my bones, but words will never harm me. And I understand what they were saying. Like, what they were probably saying is that it won't harm you physically, but can it harm you internally, psychologically, within your, social health, within the dynamics of your relationships or family? Of course that can harm you. It could get to a point where it destroys the relationship and the interactions that you have with certain people, And with that being said, I do want to uncover the fact that, I've been studying psychology because the human mind is a fascinating place. It's also a frightening place, not in the form where you're looking at it through the eyes of the cowardly, but frightening in the form where it can just go all over the place, from the most normal, basic thoughts to the most horrendous, atrocious thoughts. And being able to understand why and being able to comprehend these situations in order to bring forth a remedy for their mental well-being is also the goal, right? And I would also want to express a disclaimer that I am not qualified, right, according to paper or to the state, to give professional psychological advice or guidance. But I've studied the topic enough to tell you the facts of what I do know and to promote the mental well-being for the masses. Because outside of psychology, I'm a human being and you're a human being. And, somebody who's right in their mind should want what's best for those around them, and not just out of need or out of their social hierarchy promotion, but out of human decency, which should already be there. The, intelligence to connect with those that might have came from the opposite side of the spectrum. They have not much in relation with you, but just the fact that you're caring enough to even open your mind to see what they're saying and how they're saying it and what you can do to be there for them. So I want to start this psychological segment up with this specific topic, and the topic is the psychology behind human interaction, right? The need to belong. Humans have deeply ingrained desire, right, due to the evolution of humans to, bond with each other, to connect with each other, to socialize with each other, right? And isolation can have negative consequences, right? Because we were meant to be social forms of life. And as a social organism, right, going against our nature would essentially have an effect on our mental health. Also, attachment, right, regardless of it being due to family dynamics or a relationship or a friendship, that also it leads to more trust, to more of a comfort when you're dealing with social interactions out here in the world. There's also an identity that you get from social interactions, right, that it has an influence, within you and within the outside of the group, because it gives a sense of belonging. And the fact that you and the social group are in a position to actually see eye to eye, it gives people an understanding that they wouldn't get somewhere else, because there's so much like-minded people around that environment. It also is good for your self-esteem, and it could also be bad for your self-esteem depending on the environment that surrounds you and how people are treating you and how people are speaking to you. So positive social interactions can increase your self-esteem, and negative social interactions can decrease it, right? So the perceptions on how we form impressions on the people around us, right, is practically how we process and store the information that's applied here, right? And explaining the causes of the behavior can also help you navigate in this realm of human interaction, because the psychology behind it is deeper than what we appear it to be. For example, there could be verbal cues, but there could also be non-verbal cues, and these cues will essentially tell you what the person is trying to tell you without them actually speaking it, with their own words, through their body language, through their facial features, with the way that they're talking to you as far as their tone. Also, one very important attribute of human psychology, from my experience, is also how that has an influence that sort of can overpower people's natural consciousness, right? So it has a social influence, right? And that specific type of an influence, right, it can be positive or it can be something of a negative nature. And the reason why it can also be something of that nature is because studies have been found, right, based on human interaction and the psychology behind it, that if somebody, for example, is in a negative crowd, that crowd in a certain form can have such a strong effect on them that it will desensitize them to seeing and to believing whatever it is that they have already known to be right or wrong. And the excuse and the justification behind that is that in certain studies or in certain tests of researches that were done by psychologists or for the sake of psychology have also shown that there's more of a chance for people to engage in a moral behavior, immoral behavior, whenever they're surrounded by a social group that exhibits those specific traits. So let's just say, for example, if you live in another part of the world where a specific state religious organization controls that part of the world, and if they tell you that, let's just say, you have to torture or you have to, for example, behead or you have to kill people, for example, that don't believe in that religion. We understand that they're operating in a immoral way. We understand that that's evil. It's ungodly behavior. Even if they're putting the name of God on top of it, is extremist behavior, it's fanatical behavior, and it's wrong. We understand that in our right mind because we're seeing things with the conscience of humanity and not of a specific religion or cult. But the people that are taking those orders, regardless of if they're there, from their own free will or they're being forced or obligated, you have to understand that they'll use those orders as a justification that they're not doing as bad as these other people or as bad as they think they're doing or people would see them as doing, because they're just operating in the disguise of taking orders. So the psychology behind human interaction can be very complex because it could sort of lead into sort of a mass psychosis. And the mass psychosis is what people usually experience whenever they're denying reality, whenever they're in a delusion, whenever they're believing something that's not true, and their actions are showing proof of that psychosis behavior, right? So in a certain form, an entire religion, whether it's filled with 1 billion people, with 2 billion people, even 4 or 5, they're still, operating within the realm of mass psychosis because they're being, a delusion, right? Within their community, within themselves, and they're not just lying to themselves, right? But they're sort of polluting society by making society think that this is actually more truthful than how it is. And in religions, I'm not gonna lie to you, there could be half truths and half lies. There has to be some type of a legit understanding or background in each religion for it to even have gone that far. Because if it was just all evil behavior and a whole bunch of monsters in that environment, I think people would snap out of it faster and would say, hey, this is more like a gang than a religion. But the fact that it's able to hide within the binds of godliness and of morality and of caring and of love and of progress of society is the reason why it's able to sort of have the power that it has, over the masses. And I'm explaining this to explain that a lot of situations like these psychologically is what allows people to turn within a life of lawlessness and of monstrous behavior, because it desensitizes them and it makes them think that just because they're following orders, they're not doing as bad as those that are ordering them to do these horrible behaviors. So that can also be something that can affect many people, which is why I warn against mass psychosis. I also warn against following a social group simply because you have a need for belonging, because your need for belonging shouldn't triumph your need to live a peaceful life, to have a conscious mind, a sound mind, to be at peace with God, to know that you're not out here destroying the world and destroying families for the sake of religious extremism or delusions, something that has been happening in our world for years already, for a very long time, way before I was born, actually. uh, Religious wars were a thing. And now we're just seeing the final product of these thousands of years of ignorance and of lies, you know? So I hope that that explains a lot more behind the psychology within humans. And now you know that when you see somebody being a sheep throughout a whole crowd, a whole flock of individuals that were brainwashed, right, by a cult leader or a religious leader or whatever you want to apply it as, now you know that the person by themselves will probably be a wonderful person, but because they are within this environment that is corrupting their minds, right? Even the scripture says that, you know, if the company is bad, then it's going to corrupt your morals, So that's, real life example and proof that what I'm saying actually has an impact. What also helps as far as the psychology behind human beings is also the dynamics, right, within the group, within the relations, the perspectives that change, right? According to who you're speaking to, you do want to be a part of a social group that's healthy for you, where you'll be able to agree and not agree, and it can still, stay in the line of having that respect for each other and that understanding of, this is a thing of honor. This is not a thing of I win or you win. We're in this together, and we're here to, see how, we can collaborate, right, as a team. So it's very important to maintain healthy human interactions, but you also want to be aware of the dark side of it. And your self-esteem, it can either go up or down depending on what situations you're feeding. So just make sure for the, being of your mental health and for the well-being of those around you as well, because they'll be affected off of what happens to you, especially if they care about you, that you stay on the righteous path in life, especially if you're of a certain age. You don't have any excuse to say, hey, well, you know what, I still have to learn and I still have to experience life. It's like, no, by the time you're my age, you should already have an idea of where you want to go. Also, right, it focuses on how we learn social behaviors, right, from reinforcements, from observation, from, in certain forms, copying others. And that's why it's very important to be around people and environments that feed that, healthy behavior, because a lot of times you think you're just dealing with a toxic person or you're dealing with a good person, but actually the people that raise them, the main friends that they have a lot to do with who they become as well. And a lot of times you want to feel bad for people, but especially if they're of a certain age, again, you just have to accept things for how they are, accept things in the form where we're not God and we can't change people, and we have to give them the chance, right, to, learn and to live and to experience life, and that's about it. So I hope this psychological support, this emotional support, this spiritual support helps you people out here, that you're able to use this knowledge to increase your social intelligence, your emotional intelligence, so you can find people of quality to build with, to have a healthier life with, where you'll be able to sleep flat out in your stomach. They could stay over your house, for example. You could sleep flat out with your stomach out. You don't have to worry about anything because you know that these people are safe to be around. You can trust them. There's a comfort there that you don't see with somebody else. And that's why I developed a passion for psychology. I've also been doing whatever I can to study the the psychology behind a lot of aspects of life, because it helps you understand people. You begin to forgive them faster because you can put yourself in people's shoes. And according to the scriptures as well, it's also important to have like and be an empathetic person, because when you're like that, you're not just focusing on yourself, on what you had to go through or how you feel, but you're focusing on those around you. And if love means one thing, then it actually means to, for the most part, show it more outside of you than within you, because love is meant to be shared. Of course, you have to have love for yourself, because if you have love for yourself, you can have love for those around you. But being able to express it to the community and to the people, even people that you don't know like that, like that's real love. And I'm not just talking about love in a romantic sense, which again is also shown outside you a lot, but I'm talking about, love as a whole. When you really have love, you show it towards God, you show it within your family, outside of your family, friends, co-workers, people out that you meet randomly, to your animals, whether you have a dog or a cat. It's a beautiful thing to live like that. I don't understand why somebody will not want to live like that, especially having an understanding of life and having a basic need, right, to interact with other people, And it's a very important skill to have. I feel like it's probably forgotten art in the sense where society's becoming very superficial. Of course, they could interact with you about, regular worldly topics. But when, in the topic of the person actually looking, inside of somebody's soul and being able to observe in a careful way and, being able to connect and bond with people, on the basis of humanity, that becomes like another type of psychology or of a relationship or a situation, So we have to be very mindful of the words that we speak with. Even in the scripture, it says that life and death is in the power of the tongue. And that's why words are so powerful. It goes as far as to say that even gossip, in the sense, because this is also a part of the psychology behind human interactions, that gossip was used in tribal times to sort of protect the tribe from an outside threat. But nowadays, with modern day society and a police force and security and all these things, we no longer need that. But people also use it as a sense of belonging, regardless of its sinful nature, because in tribal times, if you didn't agree with the tribe, regardless of their behavior being bad or good, they would socially reject you, for example. And in tribal times, if you were ostracized by your tribe, your likelihood of survival was very low. And so that in turn was a survival type of a mechanism for, a human's well-being. But remember, we were also savages back then too. We weren't as, as educated as we are right now, which is the reason why we don't have the excuse for that. But even though gossip is sinful, and I actually hate gossip and I don't take no part in it, because I've seen the consequences that have happened in my life because of people gossiping, right? When they could have just came and spoke to me, right? They were about to incite violence a few times because of gossip, And again, I understand that there's a psychology for human interaction behind that, but they were about to incite extreme violence towards me, right? Because of gossip. And that in the law can form and can fall into the terms of inciting violence. And if something bad really happens, even though it'll be harder to prove because it's not like a tangible crime, that could still get somebody in trouble, which goes back to what I'm saying of your words being powerful, and the psychology of human interaction and of human words is more effective than what people think it is, because it can really build or destroy your life. If I would have entertained these situations of gossip for the sake of human bonding and the psychology of human interaction, maybe that would have took me down a bad path. So what God designed for good, which is human interaction, is what the devil uses for bad. And that's the reason why we have to be aware of this power and how to use it in the most righteous way possible. And some people that are overly religious might express having righteous judgment or righteous anger, but you're not a righteous person 100%. I'm not even righteous 100%. So how are we, or how are you supposed to talk about righteous judgment and anger if you're mad because of your own perceived offense, and not because this reaction actually offended God or is actually wrong? Your own perceived offense due to a human interaction that didn't go the way that you wanted it to go is only offensive towards you, for example, because you don't want to hear the truth. And that is ungodly. And if somebody uses the excuse of righteous judgment or anger, they're in turn distorting the context of that message because they are not operating within that realm. Because you cannot be a righteous person using human interaction to gossip, slander, defame, and put people's lives at risk just because you're mentally drained or because you have some type of disorder that has to do with paranoia. We have to be aware of these situations in life, these circumstances. We have to have mercy and forgiveness, and we have to seek God in order to keep ourselves in line. And along with this segment of the psychology behind human interaction, I hope that people can also see that that in turn has a lot to do with God, because He made us. And since He made us, He knows what is best for us. And if I can only understand a fraction of the knowledge that He gave me, then at least let that be enough for me to make this experience of life more beautiful and more positive for those that surround me. I appreciate all you people for tuning in to my psychology segment of the meaning of life. I will see what I can do to keep studying on the subject, not just within my own free time because of my passion, but on a professional level. And who knows, in a few years, I might actually be a certified psychologist. May God bless you all. Have a beautiful night and stay safe.